Hello, and here we are for the next chapter in our adventure discovering the story of Ruth. Dig down deep into the book of Ruth. In our first part, Mike left us on a bit of a cliffhanger with a little teaser about what is to come. And Naomi at that point sums up her experience well in chapter 1 verse 20. She says, "Don't call me by my name Naomi, which means pleasant, anymore." She says, "Instead, call me bitter, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty." Whatever hope they had in their hearts when they left for Boaz had firmly disappeared a long time ago. And here they are returning with their tails tucked between their legs. Yet here in chapter 2, we see the beginnings of hope. A change in fortune. The family had been in a storm that had tested their hope, their patience, and their strength almost beyond what they could bear. And yet there is hope. In essence, the whole of chapter 2 is in itself a journey from despair to hope, from bitterness to hopefulness. And today we're going to dig down deep into chapter 2 to discover what we can about this journey of hope that is found in Ruth chapter 2. Before we get into this, let me ask you just to consider, what storms have you been through, both personally and ourselves as a nation? Have we been left reeling and left feeling bitter? Have we seen our hopes and dreams dashed? My prayer is that what Paul says in Romans would become our experience. That we too would join Ruth on this journey from bitterness to hopefulness. Romans 15 verse 13, Paul says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." And this is my prayer for us as we begin this journey of hope. So in verse 1, we see that hope is outlined. Read with me in chapter 2, verse 1. "Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz." Now, the authors of the Bible, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, often use different literary devices to help signal to us that a change is about to come. Words like but and therefore, and in this case the word now, for me are a gentle whisper that change is about to come. For Ruth, hope came in the form of a very practical solution, and his name was Boaz. Interestingly, the name Boaz means strength. And I can't help thinking back to the temple that Solomon built. In 1 Kings 17 it says he erected the pillars at the portico at the front entrance of the temple. The one pillar was Jacob and the other pillar was Boaz. And Jacob means he establishes, and Boaz means in him is strength. We saw in chapter 1 that Ruth is the first in a long line of those outside the faith who were grafted in. And her experience serves as an example for us all. The good news of Jesus is not limited to a certain group of people or those who have got it all together. Rather, it is a message of hope for everyone. Ruth came to understand clearly and says this to Naomi in chapter 1 verse 16. She says, "Your people will be my people and your God will be my God." In other words, she was looking to God for hope and strength. God hears her declaration of faith and responds in a practical way by providing her the strength in the form of Boaz. This reminds me of the story of a Christian who was on the roof of a house and the flood waters were rising and he was getting really, really concerned and was desperately crying out to God and praying for deliverance. Crying out to God, saying, "Lord, rescue me." And so along the way came a boat and a helicopter, both offering to help him from the roof. And in both cases, he says, no, thank you. I'm praying to God. I'm a Christian and I'm looking for God to rescue me from the situation. Well, as you can imagine, the situation didn't turn out well for him. And later that day in heaven, the Christian asks God, God, why didn't you rescue me? I prayed for it to you to rescue me, and you didn't. What happened? And God says, I sent you a boat and I sent you a helicopter. And see, in this situation, they had ignored the very practical answers to their prayer. Now, God often answers the cries of our heart through a change in circumstances or the provision of people, and we can sometimes miss that. Ruth is a reminder to us that when we put our trust in God, He will always provide a way forward. And it's often in the form of other people. The question that we need to consider is, are we open to the help of others? And are we willing to be that help, that practical help to others? Now, Boaz was Naomi's kinsman. In other words, she was related to this man Boaz through a distant relative and through her husband, a dead husband, Elimelech. We don't know exactly how she was related, but she was. Verse 1 goes on to tell us that Boaz was a man of wealth or standing. During the time of famine, when Elimelech and his family moved all the way to Moab to find their solution during the famine, he had stayed behind. He had stayed behind and God had provided for him. 10 years before, Naomi and her family had made a choice. Now, it was a difficult choice, made during a hard time, a time of famine. But perhaps they had forgotten the promises of God to provide for them, and they put their hope in a move to Moab. But they didn't have to make that choice. The people of Bethlehem stayed behind. And they didn't all die from hunger. They were still there. And as we see in the example of Boaz, God had blessed their faithfulness. Sometimes we explain away wrong choices because of difficult circumstances. But Boaz is a reminder that God will strengthen us, that God will bless us and help us to make the right choice, even in difficult circumstances. I really like the Old Testament scholar Leon Morris and his interpretation of these verses here. He suggests that the expression a mighty man of wealth is elsewhere translated a mighty man of valor. Have a look in Judges 11 verse 1. In other words, what Morris is suggesting here is that this verse is not so much talking about Boaz's wealth, but rather his character. Now, we could easily dismiss Boaz by saying, he's just a rich guy. If I had all his wealth and his influence, surely I could make all my dreams come true and I could help others as well. But it wasn't so much his wealth, his money, that was at issue here. His strength was his character. Now, God's solution to Ruth's distress was not simply to throw money at it, but to provide her with a man of character. Boaz reminds us to yield to God during difficult times, and He will mold our character so that we can be a strength to others. So join me for episode 2 as we discover more about Ruth's encounter with hope.